Test. All right, good morning. Been a long time since we did this. I'm way out of practice, so you have to bear with me. I'm going to stand like this. He's tried to set it up a little bit. We're going to go ahead and do this on the internet so that those still at home can do be access to this class. First thing, let's see. Let me look at my notes, see what I'm supposed to do first thing. Okay, first thing is we're going to turn to Numbers chapter 1. Before we start, and before I read it, the question is, why Numbers? Well, two reasons. One is I was looking into preparing this for a class about a year ago during the pandemic or whatever, and it never came out. As a connection to, we studied, if you'll recall, we studied Exodus before that in a geographic historical format and tried to go through Exodus. We've also done Joshua the same way previous to that, and the connector in between is Numbers. It's the one that goes from after the Exodus to the time of Joshua. So I thought I'd try to take a look at it, and since I'd already started working on it back a year ago, I kind of picked up with that. Started to look at something else, and we were doing the New Testament on Wednesday night, so I decided to stick with this in the Old Testament. Hope that all works. We'll kind of go from there. So Numbers chapter 1, verse 1. And the Lord spoke to Moses in the tent of meeting at the desert of Sinai on the first day of the second month, the second year, after the Israelites came out of Egypt. He said, "Take a census of the whole Israelite community by their clans and families, listing every man by name, one by one. You and Aaron are to number by their divisions all the men in Israel 20 years older or more who are able to serve in the army. One man from each tribe, each of the head of the families is to help you." Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for the day and the opportunity to come back and study your word. Bless us as we do this in your Son's name. Amen. All right. Find the right page. Okay, first thing we need to do is Numbers. We call it the book of Numbers because in English, that is what has been used on all the English translations to name it. And it is named Numbers because of why? A lot of numbers. But in reality, it doesn't. But what do you read in the first chapter? Census, numbers. What do you read at the end? Numbers, census. And so in the English, they kind of took that, and the reality is, and I'm not a Greek expert or anything, but my understanding is the way it was written in the Greek translation, it looked like the word numbers. And they said, oh yeah, it's all about numbers. So every time we think of the book of Numbers, we always think about boring numbers. As a matter of fact, my wife asked me last night, what are we studying? And I told her, and she said, I said, wake up. She said, make it interesting. Honestly, that's the way I've always felt about numbers all my life too. But when you go to the Hebrew, the original Hebrew, the Jews, when they look at the book and they pull it out of a Hebrew text, the name is not Numbers. The name means in the wilderness. And the reality is, as we study and go through this book of Numbers, that's what we're talking about. In the wilderness. Yes, it starts with a census, and we'll talk about that for a few minutes today. But we're not going to spend 3 months talking about Numbers. We're going to be talking about in the wilderness. Okay? So, it was written by Moses. Everybody, he indicates it. Most everybody believes it. There may have been somebody later, scribes have added a note or two or whatever to update or whatever, but for generally speaking, Moses wrote it while he was in the wandering in the wilderness, okay, during this period of time. The purpose was to account for the time that was spent in the wilderness. Exodus goes all the way up to Mount Sinai, and we'll talk about that in just a second, kind of refresh ourselves. And then Joshua takes over when they march into the land of Canaan. The part in between is the book of Numbers. It's the time that they spent in the wilderness. We know it is 40 years. Okay? In addition to that, it's an account that Moses wrote to recount how God was faithful, provided justice, and mercy. When you look at the incidents and the things that took place, we can see how God acted in every one of these. Okay? So that's what the book of Numbers is about. Let me get this out of the way. All right, to kind of set things up, kind of do a quick rehash of our study of Exodus. Basically, Israel had been in Egypt for about 430 years, and the Bible says a new king came to power. As we looked at it, based on what we know about history, which we discussed then, are guesses, educated guesses. Locations are educated guesses, so there are multiple guesses. But generally speaking, basically what we looked at and the approach we took was that a new came into power. Basically, the pharaohs, Egypt had been around for a long time, but the pharaohs had lost power to a group of kings from the Canaan, Syrian area called the Hyksos. Billy's talked about that a little bit. And they had ruled northern Egypt. Well, the pharaohs had taken control back, and so now they were in control of all of Egypt. As they took control of this, there came a new king to power, one that did not know Joseph, because that was 400 years before that. He was afraid of them because of their Semitic background, the fact that they were from the same place that these powers that they'd been fighting with were from, Canaan, Syrian, all up through there. So because of that, he oppressed them and made them slaves. We talked about how he did that. We all know how that was. Time came, God chose Moses to be his deliverer. We find that he was born in Goshen. I got this thing to use. All right. So here's right in here is where the Pharaoh's main place was, but right over here is the place where the people that ruled, and this is land of Goshen right over in here, where the Israelite people lived. Okay? And so he was born in Goshen. We know how he was rescued by the daughter of Pharaoh. And the daughter of Pharaoh was residing in a palace that was right here in a place called, I don't remember now, but later it was called Ramses. So if you look at history or whatever, later on it was named after a later Pharaoh in that particular place. So he lived, after living his younger years with his family here, Hebrew family, then he moved into the palace with the daughter of the king, Pharaoh. We remember that he got in trouble when he killed somebody because he was upset at how they were treating one of his fellow Hebrews. And because of that, the Bible says he fled. And when he fled, he left here. And basically, the main roads go right up here to the Syrians. There's another one that goes right here and then turns north into Syria or goes on into the desert. The Bible says he fled to Midian. As he fled, he ran right down the road there and turned and went down here to Midian. Okay? So as he goes down to Midian, and he lives there until he's 80 years old. When he's 80 years old, the Bible says that he was on the backside of a mountain called Horeb, watching sheep of his father-in-law, and God called him on the mountain. So he goes, and after all his complaining and the things we know about or whatever, he finally decides to go rescue his people. So he comes back to Midian, and he leaves, and as he goes north, he meets his brother, Aaron, and they continue up, and they go over here to meet with the Pharaoh. They get to Pharaoh, and he goes to the palace at Avaris. That was the name of that area at the time, which is Ramses, was later named Ramses several hundred years later. Okay? And he goes to the palace, and basically his message is this. Yahweh, God of Israel, says, let my people go. That was his message. Day in, day out, that was what he told him. And Pharaoh's response, who incidentally was his stepbrother, his response was, who is Yahweh, this God of Israel, that I should obey? So he had his own gods, and then the hierarchy of gods, he was the ultimate God, the Pharaoh was, over all the gods. And that's the way they believed. And so here Moses comes up and says, hey, Yahweh, the God of Israel, tells you to let him go. And he's going, okay, who is this Yahweh? And why should I listen to him? Because he looked at himself as being the supreme being. All right? So, as we know, Yahweh proceeded to show both Pharaoh and Israel who he was. After some demonstrations or whatever, God set about to bring plagues upon him and brought the 10 plagues. We went through this. As we discussed it, one of the things we pointed out was each plague was a direct attack on an Egyptian god. And who that god, and how God was stronger and better than their gods. They couldn't stop him, no matter what they tried to do. Until even the 10th plague, which was the death of the firstborn, and attack on Pharaoh himself and his firstborn as being the ultimate God. And so that was basically that. So at the end of this, these 10 plagues, we know that Pharaoh knew that he was God, who Yahweh was, but not only that, Israel has. See, and that was one thing I hadn't thought about when we studied that lesson, is it's important because Israel didn't even know who Yahweh was when Moses came to him. And they were saying, really? Who's this? It had been 400 plus years since Joseph had come with his father Jacob and all of them had come into the land. So they didn't even know who Yahweh was, the God of Jacob, God of Abraham. And so they, in turn, learned who this is. All right? Next thing that takes place is they proceed to leave Egypt. As I stated a minute ago, the two main highways went up to this way, and the other went this way to Syria. We find that in Exodus, the Bible tells us that God said, don't take the easy way, take the long way by the wilderness and the Red Sea. He tells them to go this way, the hard way. So, because this is the easy way to be chased down and caught and everything, or turn around and come back. So he basically had them go this way. So as we look at this, we see, and I've got another map I want to pull up there. So basically, as they flee here, they go through a place called Succoth. They take the highway, the main highway that goes down through here to this point. After they get to this point, we see that they turn and come back. They cross the Red Sea. And as they cross through the Red Sea, we find that they're in a panic. They're trapped here with the Egyptian army coming after them and the Red Sea in front of them. There's no way to cross. And so they're in a panic, and we find that God does what? Parts the sea. There's a bridge. There's a road in the waterway as he parts the sea. A dry roadway to take them straight across. So they cross the Red Sea at this part or whatever. And as they do that, we find that after they get to the far side, what happens? Releases the water, and God destroys the Egyptian army that was pursuing them. which, if we're right about who the Pharaoh was and all that, he did go back decimated and later rebuilt his army, but he went back decimated because of the forces that were lost at that particular time. Of course, at that time, we went by why we select the choice was thought to be this versus up through the swamps here or across the river here or a few places that other folks have mentioned. There was even a proposed thought maybe they went through here. But it had mostly to do with the road that they were fleeing, because he was going back to where he came from, trying to get away from him like he'd already fled once before. Anyway, so here we go. He crosses the Red Sea, and as he crosses the Red Sea, he goes down to Midian, where his father-in-law is, leaves part of his family there for a period of time, and then comes back up here to what many believe to be the location of Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb. It's called both things. And so they would stay there. As you recall, while they were there, what happens? Do what? 10 Commandments. 10 Commandments. So here they get there, and one of the first things, well, even before he does that.
Actually, not only just the 10, but
yeah.
10 plus the other 4.
And actually, that actually follows what I keep forgetting, the covenant. See, he actually made a covenant with them as to who he was and who they were. And basically, from here on out, you're going to see a reference throughout the Old and New Testament about God being their people, their God, and them being his people. And he talks about that relationship and how he will defend them, he will fight for them, he will take care of them, he will provide for them, he will do everything for them that they need. Their side of the covenant was they were to obey him and be faithful and trust him. And so he makes that covenant, and the people and the elders and all that go through that covenant with him. And he brings the 10 Commandments to them, along with, as John pointed out, there's actually a whole slew of instructions. If you go through Leviticus and several other, Deuteronomy, I think both of them record a lot of those. But they were summed up in those 10 Commandments. Later we find Jesus takes the 10 and squashes them down into 2 commandments. But basically those 10 Commandments, he gives them the law. He also turns around and has them build a tabernacle. So he gives them instructions for the tabernacle, and right there in that very first year, while they're at Mount Sinai, at the foot of the mountain, they are given the commandments. They are told how to build the tabernacle. They build it. Once they build it, they make all the implements. And once they make all the implements, God tells them how to worship him. He says, okay, so here we go. Back over here in Egypt, he says, I'm Yahweh, the God of your fathers. Trust me. He takes them over here through the Red Sea, destroys the Egyptian army, takes them over here and says, I'm Yahweh. Trust me. I will take care of you. Now over here, he gives them the commands and says, this is what I expect of you. I'm going to do this. This is what I expect of you. Okay? And so he gives them those commandments, instructions on how to worship and what they need to do. This basically took place in the first, well, it did take place in the first year that they were there. As a matter of fact, the first time they worshiped was the first day of the first month of the second year that they had left. So here we go. We find them here at Mount Sinai. And they have done, God has taught them who he was, demonstrated it, and he set them up and showed them how they are to serve him and worship him. All right? So he's done all that. That's where Exodus ends. Now we move to Numbers. We move to Numbers, and we find that about a month later, he gives them instructions on how to organize an army. All right, so that's the first chapter of Numbers, is what we start dealing with there. First thing he does, it says take a census. Does God do this a lot in the Bible? Is it always a good thing?
A couple of times he allows it, and other times it's done without his permission, or as a thing to tick him off.
Yes, it did. When you do a census, what were they counting? What did we just read?
People that were 20 years old and able to serve in the military.
Able to serve in the military. So when you do the census, like God told him here, he was saying, let's see how big your army is. Multiple times, and that's what John was referring to, his people decided they needed to do a census because they needed to see how big their army was. And God was, quote, ticked off because God said, I got it handled. Why are you counting your men? Your millions are nothing compared to my hand. Which incidentally, as they left Egypt, his hand had done 98% of the work. And so it was basically, in those cases, was a case where they didn't trust him, didn't have faith in him. All right? But the whole purpose of a census is not to know how many people you got to feed. It's not to know how many senators to send to Washington. The purpose of a census in God's hands was to decide how many fighting men were there to fight the battle. All right? So here he is, as we begin Numbers, getting ready to prepare his invasion force. Because they left Egypt, but they were going to go take a land. And a land that he was going to, as we remember from Joshua, that they were told to utterly destroy everyone in it. Invade it, take it, obliterate it, and make it your land. So here we are in Numbers chapter 1, and he's taken a census in order to put together an invasion force. All right? So when he does that, he tells them to select men that are 20 years and up, fighting age, and able to serve in the army. He says to list each man by name, not just a group of them, but every man by name from every household. Not just household, but tribe or clan. It depends on your translation. We call them the 12 tribes, but the 12 clans, the 12 whatever. And their families, what family of the tribe they were. Because keep in mind, Judah was no longer alive. It was just his sons, grandsons, whatever, and their families. But they were all still part of the clan or tribe that belonged to Judah. So he says, let's do a census by tribe, by grouping. And so he goes through, counts them all out by family and tribe. Now, why do you think that's important?
Several reasons. The size of their clan or tribe will eventually, in the end of this, in the next 40 years, depend on how much land allotment that they have.
Okay.
But also just to keep a record of their tribes, a written record of who they are as a people.
Okay. It's more than that. We're putting together an army. Anybody in the Marines? Ex-Marine? When you're in the Marines, you got a unit, right? What are the people in your unit called? They're your what? Your brothers. The people you support. What'd you call them? They're the ones that's a unit that you go together and you got their back, they got your back, you're six, whatever. You know, I'm not in the military, never been. But it's a group of people, and each of you's got each other. When God organizes them and puts them in a military organization, he does it by clan and by family. So when you go out to fight, who are you fighting with? Your brothers. Think of the motivation that means. You got to have his back because he's your brother, he's your cousin, he's your uncle. And if you mess up, your family dies. At the same time, if you decide to lay down on the job, guess what? Uncle and brother's there to grab you and drag you into the middle of it, keep you accountable. So God set it up in such a way that each of them would be accountable to each other and support each other as a fighting unit. So he sets them up by clan and by family unit. All right, then he goes in and the Bible says that he organizes them into divisions. I didn't know that. until I started studying this. I always thought about the 12 tribes, and I did know that they had a special way they marched and stuff like that, but it wasn't just that. He organizes them into divisions. He takes the 12 tribes, first of all, and he organizes a division. And let me see if I got something else up here. I'm supposed to be showing you. Sometimes I get talking, and, well, that's where we are. He organizes them into 4 divisions. Basically, you could call it the East Division, the West Division, the East Division, the West Division, the North Division, the South Division. Of course, that's not north and south, it's north, whichever, but 4 different divisions. Each division was made up of 3 tribes. So he sets them up, starting with the East Division, which is the division that's Judah. Judah is the division leader. And you have Judah, Zebulun, and Issachar, which makes up the Eastern Division. He goes on and says that in addition to that, you have a North Division that's led by Dan, a South Division led by Reuben, and a West Division led by Ephraim. All right? So as you look at these 4 divisions, he tells them this is how they're set up. Now, one thing about these, so they're made up of these group of people in each of these particular divisions. It's interesting that most of them, not all of them, were actually related through their mother. Who are these children? Rachel's. Okay, these are Joseph's children. This is Benjamin. This is Rachel's family. Over here is Judah, Zebulun, Issachar. These are Leah's. Did I get that right? Yes. Or Leah's. Part of the second group, Reuben, part of these are Leah's. Then the others are made up of their handmaidens or concubines. Anyway, that once again reinforces that family thing or whatever as they were put together. All right. When you look at this, the combined forces, 166,000, 108,000, 157, and 151,000. Later we'll study and look at how they take them and go out marching, but this basically shows how they set up the camp. Now, when you set up the camp, this is interesting because Egypt, there's historical records showing how Egypt set up their military camps. You know how they set up their camp? They had a camp in the middle with the king, and then he had all his divisions in a square all the way around him to protect him to set it up. That's how they set up their military camps. So Israel's is very much like the military camps of the day. It was set up. So we find that we have these different divisions and units surrounding who is in the middle? God. Who's the king? God. Remember God's biggest gripe with Israel all the way through 1 Kings and 2 Samuel, because the people wanted an earthly king because they didn't recognize God as king. God has always wanted to be king. And so here we find that just like the military forces of the day were set up, in the middle of this was the tent that belonged to the king, called the tabernacle. So we find the king's tent in the middle and all the military force around them ready for there. Okay? All right. In addition to that, if you'll look here, there's 12 different units or 12 tribes. We had 2 what we call half tribes, and we're going to see when they go into the land, and we studied in Joshua how these 2 would actually get a tribe's share of land. Which is missing? Which son of Jacob is missing? Levi. Okay? Levi is special. Levi is not there because God chose Levi. As we look into chapter 3, I think it is, we find that Levi is chosen to do what they do. Why? Does anybody remember why? All right, he gave them that job, but he gave them that job because he had already selected them. Do you remember why? In Egypt, when they were there and the 10th plague came along, God came through and took the firstborn of every living thing. Remember that? Except for who? Israelites. He told them, put us, and I'll pass over you. But we find in Numbers that he tells us that he didn't just let that go away. They had to give their firstborn as well. And what God chose, he told them here, is that he chose Levi and his clan as the firstborn to be his first chosen. You remember God gets the first fruits and everything, the firstborn, first everything, and he is chosen to be that one, his whole tribe. And so beginning the day that they left, even when he gave him the job of slaughtering those who were against him, that John referred to, we will find that the tribe of Levi, of which Aaron is a part of, is going to be the tribe that God chose to be his person that takes care of his dwelling, his worship, his everything. They are chosen not to be warriors. They're not in the armed forces. That's not their job. They're not out there to raise farms and do all the other things. Their whole sole purpose was to be set apart, sanctified, made holy, to work and serve God on behalf of the people. It was a choice, yes.
I'm sure I've read this in time, but I don't remember right now. Was Levi the eldest?
No. Yeah, actually when you get...
Chosen.
He was chosen. That's what it says. He was selected or chosen to be that way. God chose him. Just like Judah is chosen. Is Judah the oldest? No. Who's the oldest? Reuben. Reuben's the oldest. But because of things that happened in their life and different things, God skipped over them and went to Judah. Reuben and Simeon did some things that caused some really violent things or whatever. He said, no, you will not. Judah, you will be served by Judah. See, God doesn't always take the firstborn. Jacob was the secondborn. Time and time again, God chooses who he chooses. And that's written down in Romans, by the way. And it literally says, Paul says that. God chooses whom he chooses. Because why? He's God. And he can choose what he wants. A lot of times we argue and say, well, I don't make no sense. And the answer is, I'm sorry. Nobody said it had to make sense to me. God does what he does because he's Yahweh. And that was the whole point of Exodus, is he's Yahweh. And now he's turned around, he's built an army, and he's doing the same thing. When he selects Levi, he selects him for whatever reason. He may tell us, I don't remember if he did, but he selects Levi to be the one that would serve him throughout the entire time of Israel being his chosen people. All right? So then he turns around and he takes Levites and he gives them some jobs, but not just that, but he breaks them down in, there's 3 sons of Levi. The first one is the Kohathites. That is the tribe that Aaron belongs to. Okay? That is the son that his great whatever grandfather is. Him and all of Aaron's descendants are given the job of touching and dealing with the things that are holy. If it's sanctified and holy and only supposed to be touched by the priest, they are the ones that are made the priest. See, the whole tribe of Levi doesn't become a priest. They serve him, but they're not the priest. Only the descendants of Aaron are. And they're the only ones that can touch the holy implements. So whenever it comes time to move this thing and to deal with it, it's their responsibility to deal with the Ark of the Covenant and the holy things that are God called holy. And there's a list in Numbers you can read. Basically, we're going through chapters 1 through 4 in case you didn't know. In addition to that, the rest of his Levite family, Gershon, the Gershonite, they are, no, did I get that right? No, it's the Kohathites. Kohathites, and I didn't think that, yeah, they may be there on the south. Anyway, the Kohathites, they are the rest of the descendants that are related to Aaron. From that, there was 3 sons from that son, and they are the ones that are supposed to deal with all the other implements in the temple that are not considered thou shalt not touch. Okay? And so they would carry those items. The other 2 sons of Levi, Merari and Gershon, these 2 sons were given a jobs. Gershon's descendants were given the responsibility to carry the tents and the coverings, the cloth. And the descendants of Merari were given the responsibility for carrying the structure, the poles and the ridge post and all the different things that are rods and everything that would hold up the tent. So they were all given a responsibility as far as when it came time to move, who was responsible for what part of God's tent. All right? So their job was to look after God's tent, the king's tent, to manage him and to minister through the worship service and provide the wood and all the things that were needed for sacrifice and to do everything related to that. And this is how the camp was set up in order to prepare for their march they were about to do to invade Canaan. All right, that's chapters 1 through 4. Any questions, comments?
You laid out every aspect of their daily life. I mean,
God
was, everything was in direct order, no confusion whatsoever.
Absolutely. But God isn't the author of, not the author of confusion. He's the author of order and everything. I mean, John mentioned that there's more than 10 commandments. Tons and tons and tons of those commandments are all health related. You're living in a desert. You're living in a hot, terrible, crummy place to live, as we would consider it. He laid out things to do and how to deal with things as simple as getting fungus or whatever, infections and all kinds of stuff. What to eat, how to eat certain things so that you don't get certain parasites and diseases and things. I mean, yeah, God laid it all out for him and said, you do what I say, and you got no problems. I'll take care of you. You just trust me. And so now he's preparing an army to advance into that. Anything else?
So
Next week we're going to take a look at, let me see my lesson. Next one is going to be deal with chapters 5 through 9, talking about God and his people. We're going to look at holiness and purity, unfaithfulness, God's blessings, and Israel giving blessings. Keep in mind as we look at these things, we're not going to superanalyze the events, okay? In other words, one of them talks about an unfaithful wife. We're not in here to try to analyze what he's trying to say about an unfaithful wife. That's a lesson in and of itself. What he's really trying to say is, talks more about purity and holiness and sanctity, and all those things and God's expectation related to those things. And so we're going to look at it from what Moses was trying to say as he used specific examples. All right. Next week we will take a look at those chapters.